Welcome to Sounds of Resistance channel. The war between Ukraine and Russia caused a great loss of credibility for the Russian army. While the Russian military has lost its credibility, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has also been humiliated. The world's greatest authority saw Russia as a superpower, but the Ukrainian army has proven that Russia is not a great power. Of course, we should not forget the help of the United States and Western states in this process. Many mistakes made by Russian forces on the battlefield have devalued Vladimir Putin in the eyes of the Russian people and world leaders. To show that he was not responsible for the failures, Putin dismissed the top generals of the Russian military, placing responsibility for the failed operations on them. After the explosions at the Kerch Bridge in Crimea the other day, Vladimir Putin went mad and launched hundreds of missiles at Ukrainian cities. Russian missiles hit Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure. This cruel and inhumane attack by Russia was brutal. On the other hand, in a similar period of time, dramatic news came from the Ukrainian front that moved the constructions. Dramatic moments as Ukrainian soldiers compassionately rescue a wounded Russian soldier reveal the huge difference between Putin's army and Zelensky's. Soldiers in the Ukrainian army also draw attention to the compassionate approach to the soldiers in the Russian forces. After the mobilization decision of Russian President Vladimir Putin, Ukrainian leader Zelensky stated that Russian soldiers who came to the front forcibly and surrendered to the Ukrainian forces would be treated as guests. A situation on the front after those words proves that these words will be true. A video recorded from a body camera of Ukrainian soldiers was published on social media. The video recorded their communication with a wounded Russian soldier captured by Ukrainian forces. After the Ukrainian ambush, a Russian MT-LB tank slammed into a house, turning it into a pile of rubble. A Russian soldier was identified under the rubble. The Russian soldier, who was under large pieces of debris from the building, begged the Ukrainian soldiers to kill him, telling the Ukrainian soldiers to finish me off. The plea made by the Russian soldier was actually a statement reflecting how bad the Russian soldiers were. The Ukrainian soldiers showed that they were not like the Russians, despite the begging of the Russian soldiers. While the Ukrainian forces showed the difference between them and the Russians, he told the Russian soldier that we are not like you. After these statements, the Ukrainian forces began to clear the debris on the Russian military. In this process, the Ukrainian soldier who tried to save the Russian soldier asked his friends to cover him so that the Russian soldier would not get cold. After the Ukrainian soldiers rescued the Russian soldier trapped under the rubble, they asked him why he had come to Ukraine. After the Ukrainian soldiers rescued the Russian soldier trapped under the rubble, they asked him why he had come to Ukraine. The answer given by the Russian combat soldier to these questions was quite meaningful. The soldier who said that he came to Ukraine due to the pressure of the Russian army claimed that he did not kill anyone and that he was a doctor. Ukrainian forces did not believe that the Russian soldier was a doctor. The reason why the Ukrainian soldiers did not believe this answer was that a real doctor would not come to Ukraine from a Russian city and kill civilians. Through this video, Ukraine's defense minister Alexei Reznikov called on the invading Russian forces to lay down their arms. Ukraine's defense minister has promised to ensure the safety of life to Russian soldiers who lay down their weapons. This call means a lot for many soldiers whose morale has dropped to zero in the Russian army. In addition, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine took advantage of these statements and said a few words to the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. The Ukrainian defense minister stated that the Russian troops were deceived and betrayed by Putin. He also underlined that the only one responsible for the Russian soldiers who died on the territory of Ukraine is Putin, because of his fantasy and incorrect strategy. In the war under Putin's responsibility, the Russian army suffered great losses. Along with the dead soldiers of the Russian army, most of the areas temporarily occupied by the Russian forces came back under control of the Ukrainian forces. In this situation, it can be said that Russian soldiers lost their lives in vain in Ukraine. The Russian invaders were repulsed by Ukrainian forces on several fronts. It seems that the withdrawal of Russian forces will not end until they leave Ukrainian territory. Since the last few days of February, the war between Ukraine and Russia has been going on. During this period, many war experts commented on the war. When we look at the comments in general, the biggest shortcomings of Russia are revealed. It is estimated that the biggest problem of the Russian army is the lack of a great reason to fight. The main purpose of many Russian soldiers who come to fight for Russia is to collect the rubles promised by the Kremlin government throughout the war. Russian citizens who went to war to earn money thought that they would collect gold like in the Super Mario game but on Ukrainian soil, but things did not go as they expected. Experts, on the other hand, think that the biggest problem of the Russian army is a lack of education and inexperience. While Ukrainian forces used modern weapons from the US and Western countries, soldiers in the Russian army had to use old Soviet weapons and military equipment. There is no need for much knowledge and training to use modern weapons that the Ukrainian forces have. However, both experience and long-term training are needed to use old technology weapons from the Soviet Union in the hands of the Russian army. Kremlin government officials, on the other hand, state that the biggest shortcomings of the Russian troops that failed in Ukraine are the wrong strategies and the lack of command. The high number of dismissed generals shows that Putin thinks so. In fact, when we looked at some of the information from the fronts, when some soldiers were waiting for orders from their radios in the face of the Ukrainian attacks, the response of their commanders was to take care of yourself. In addition, as the Kherson offensive began, 4 top commanders of the Russian forces abandoned their units and fled to the east of the Dnipro River. These instances and their like occurred over and over again during the 8-month war. Considering the reasons that we mentioned earlier, we can count the shortcomings of the Russian army. Mainly, a lack of education and experience, aimlessness, an incorrect strategy, and a lack of command are the underlying causes of the general problems of the Russian army. For these reasons, the probability of the Russian army making mistakes and harming themselves is very high. While this is the case with the Russian army, the Ukrainian army is doing their best by showing a very stable, superior performance. First of all, President of Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky, exhibiting an excellent example of bureaucracy all over the world, organized all world leaders to help Ukraine. As a matter of fact, the whole world was aware that there was a Russian threat in the east. However, since Russia did not take any action, they were looking for an opportunity with their hands tied in this regard. Putin gave this opportunity by launching the Ukraine invasion plan. But the Ukrainian army did not embarrass Zelensky in the face of world leaders by conducting successful operations. And in addition, the Ukrainian forces regained control of the areas temporarily occupied by the Russians. Ukrainian citizens in the regions that were under Ukrainian control again welcomed their soldiers with great enthusiasm. It is emphasized that in the past week, the Russian forces have lost more than 2,000 soldiers. Armored military vehicles as well as soldiers were either destroyed or abandoned and left for use by Ukrainian forces. We can say that it was a very harmful week for the Russian forces. Ukrainian forces have been transparent about Russian and their own casualties since the beginning of the war. According to the latest statement of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, the number of soldiers lost by the Russian army has exceeded 60,000, and nearly 3 or 4 times that number is said to have injured Russian soldiers. There is a big difference between Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers in what they are fighting for and how, and this difference will be enough to lead the Ukrainians to victory. Thanks for watching.